All right, Zig coming in on the top. Today on the show, we have Victor DeLorenzo, drummer, actor, singer, songwriter, and studio engineer extraordinaire. He was a founding member of a band called The Violent Femmes. Yeah, The Violent Femmes. And he's in a band called 1913, spelled out. It's a duo with him and a cellist. And his newest project, The Night Crickets, with David J. from Bauhaus and Darwin Miners. And this is part 2 of my Night Crickets series. We talked to David J. last week, and now we're talking Victor. I was familiar with Bauhaus and David J.'s music, but not as familiar as I was with The Violent Femmes. So growing up, my cousin Dan, he downloaded me a torrent of all the Violent Femmes stuff, right? I was familiar with that first record, and I remember hanging out with him in Dallas, and he was ripping music from his computer onto he just gave me a hard drive. That's what it was, from his hard drive. And he gave me all the Violent Femmes stuff. And there was something about those songs and how they were performed and how edgy they were, but how easily they flowed and through madness. There's some parts, if you listen to Blister of the Sun, there's those breakdowns that are just on the edge of how does anyone recreate this and then bring it back home? And there's so many songs that are of the Violent Femmes, so many songs that are just on the edge of are they going to land it? But they land it and it's so smooth. So there's this captured chaos that doesn't even feel like it. And they do it in a way that cultivates this unique approach to modern folk music with a punk attitude. And after talking to Victor, that was a huge goal for the Violent Femmes, was to cultivate their own uniqueness. And Victor's still doing that now. His newest band, the Night Crickets, have a new record out. It's called A Free Society. It's one of the coolest records I've heard this year. And we're going to listen to a tune. This is Amanda's Mantra off of Free Society, the Night Crickets. Amanda's Mantra, the Night Crickets. A Free Society is the record. It's available now wherever you get your music. That includes all streaming platforms. One cool thing about this interview, besides talking with Victor, was this was the first throwback to the original Zig at the Gig format. That being, I recorded this interview out of my van at the gig. So I play in a band. If you're new to this podcast, I play in a band called Sea Level, letter C dash. We are a high-energy funk punk reggae rock group based out of Cleveland, taking acoustic guitars and running them through Marshall amps and going wild. So if you dig the Violent Femmes, you might dig some of our stuff. But we were playing at Nelson's Ledges, which is a place in Ohio where a lot of music festivals happen. And I bet you're like, well, it's October. What are you talking about? And yeah, we played a cold one. We played a cold festival. We were out by the quarry. I want to shout out anyone who was at that show. Thank you for hanging out with us at Magic Moments Fest at Nelson's. It was cold. We were cold. And we appreciate you guys being there with us because it was a blast. But before we hit the stage, I was hidden away in my van talking to Victor, which was my initial pitch for how this podcast would work. I'm like, while we're at the gigs, I'll interview people before we play, which eventually crumbled. It became too much to be at the gig, do the gig, get ready for the gig, and try to interview the guy you're playing with. No, it didn't work, but it was a fun idea. This was a great honor to talk to Victor, and I couldn't ask for a more pleasant, insightful interview. If you're really into acting, this is a great insight into the parallels of acting and music. With that being said, if you can rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on one of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests and sharing their insights with you. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Victor. Awesome, man. Well, I'm super excited to talk with you.
So we have that connection off the bat.
Wonderful. I guess, I'm going to delete in my first question, I guess, off your cousin. Your first cousin, or not, one of your cousins sold you your first drum kit, right?
No, actually, what happened was my cousin Michael, when I was in high school, he had a friend who was selling a drum set because he was going to Vietnam. And so my cousin Michael asked me if I knew anybody that would be interested. And I said, no, not really. I don't really know anybody that plays the drums now or wants to. But then the more I thought about it, I couldn't even believe I heard myself saying, but maybe I should buy it. And he said, "Oh, really? Why do you want to buy it?" And I said, "I don't know. It just seems like it might be the right thing to do, and I would like to help out your friend." So I got a set of Slingerland, 4-piece Slingerland drum set with cymbals for $350. And I wish I still had that set.
Oh man, that's a good deal to get everything in one package for 350.
I
That's not
know.
bad.
I
Symbols,
know.
very cool. Because you were playing what viola right before?
When I was in grade school, there was a kind of a soft music program at my grade school. I grew up in Racine, Wisconsin, and I went to Catholic grade school and high school. And at Sacred Heart, I think around maybe fourth grade, that's when we were offered the idea of playing a musical instrument. And they only had string instruments available at that time. So I chose to play the viola. And I studied viola for, I think it was only a couple years. And then I started taking piano lessons. And eventually, I decided when I got the drum set I told you about, after fooling around just playing to records for a while, I decided to take instruction. And there was a great drummer, music teacher in Racine named Joe Police. And his claim to fame was he came to prominence in Chicago in the 40s and 50s. He was a big band drummer, and he was contemporary and friends with Buddy Rich and Louis Bellson and Papa Joe Jones and all
Yeah.
kinds of those early drummers. And so what I got from Joe was not only an understanding of how to read music, rhythmic notation, but also the artistry involved with playing the brushes. And that's something that I took into my career with Violent Femmes. Of course, to play rock music, I had to bastardize the system a little bit, but yeah, I'm indebted to this day to Joe getting me started with playing the brushes, because I absolutely love playing the brushes.
It's a whole different like texture and like how you like use like a with like especially the Femmes use like a minimal kit. Like the
Right.
brushes bring out like what the cymbals, the hi hat does, and like it's interesting because not like getting ready to talk with you, I was really listening for that, and like
Uh huh.
I noticed the brushes before, but like listening through, I'm like I don't hear as many cymbals. So is that like
Right.
part of the work is like is that part of it? Is
Well, when I decided what I was going to attempt to do with the Femmes, my first consideration was, what can I haul when I'm walking on the street going to busk?
yeah.
Because essentially what we would do, instead of, even though we did do this sometimes, rehearse in a musty old basement, we like to go out on a nice summer afternoon and play music for the people on the streets. So I couldn't bring, well, I couldn't economically, of course, bring a full drum set. So I decided, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to develop a style that can apply to just one drum. So I can
Mm.
simulate or give the impression of a full drum set with just using one drum. And at that time, I thought the easiest and fastest and most unique way to accomplish that would be to play brushes. Because with brushes, I have found that I can play louder with brushes than I can even with sticks. And also, there's so many more applications with the brushes that are available to you that you just don't have using a very solid piece of wood, being a drumstick.
No, that makes sense because of the like watching you play. Like, are you using like when I look at the brushes you use, it doesn't look like the metal ones, or they look like the
Well, I
big
use
kind of broomy ones.
right. I used to use metal brushes exclusively until I was introduced to. They're called. Let me think what they're called now. I think they might be called wicks. You know what? Here,
Wicks.
wait. I got a pair. I got a pair over here. Let me look at them.
There-
Yeah, I'm kind of spacing out what they are. Yeah. Okay. They're regal tip. They're called whiskers, and
Whiskers.
they have a metal handle and then a nylon brush itself. So what I found was that the brushes, the whiskers, were easier to play because they weren't as heavy as the metal strand brushes, and also they were more dependable as far as taking them on tour. I didn't have to constantly be buying new brushes every week because these whiskers seem to last quite a long time. So there's a few different reasons why I started playing them, but I certainly love them, and if I was smart, I should probably ask them for an endorsement.
Yeah, totally. Well, so like with the idea of busking with the Femmes, how did that kind of like become this is how we're going to go do it? Like, cause you and Brian started as a rhythm group, right? Just
Yeah,
backing
we
up other
called
artists.
ourselves our rhythm section. The two of us, we called Violent Femmes, and the reason we called it that was because Brian was talking to a friend one day, and the friend asked Brian if he had a brother or a sister, and Brian said yes. As a matter of fact, I have a brother, and and then the friend said, "Well, is he a musician also?" And Brian was just kind of playing along, trying to just shut the guy up, and he said, "Yeah, he's a musician too." And the friend continued and said, "Well, does he play in a band?" And Brian said, "Yeah, he plays in a band. It's called Violent Femmes." And he just came up with the name off the top of his head, because in Milwaukee, when we would refer to someone as being kind of a weak person or an effeminate person, we would call them a femme. So Brian, I guess, got off on the idea of this feminine person, whether it be male or female, becoming violent. so so that was some kind of a kick for him in his mind. And then I think it was maybe a few days later, he came over to practice, and he said, "Victor, I think I came up with a name for our rhythm section." I said, "Oh, really? What is it?" And he said, "How about Violent Femmes?" And I just looked at him and I said, "Well, it's certainly not a name you're going to forget." but I don't really know if that's apropos. But we just went with it for a while, and when we met Gordon, for a small amount of time, we were billing ourselves as Gordon Gano and the Violent Femmes.
Okay.
And then finally, it got to a point where people were just referring to us as Violent Femmes or just the Femmes. So we decided, well, let's just call ourselves Violent Femmes.
Okay. So like so the idea of busking was just like was that just where you guys would practice, or how did like the idea of hitting the streets like with the Femmes like
Well, it was hard for us rather to get a job in the regular clubs because we were so unique at that time.
yeah.
Playing an acoustic mariachi bass, one guy playing a snare drum with brushes, and then this other guy singing these incredible young adult minded songs, and they also happen to be very catchy. So so even though we had that going for us, it was still looked at as a liability for us in the Milwaukee music scene, because everything at that time was hair metal and full drum sets and stacks of Marshalls and what have you. But we were just the weird psychedelic farmers on the on the scene, and people didn't quite know what to do with us. So we figured, well, the hell with it. We don't need to go play in a club. We'll just go on the streets and play. And I think that not only was something for us to do, but it also really honed our craft as far as being the unique musicians that we became. And also, we could use that in the future, busking outside, as a real good promotional tool. When we were in different cities, we could just go play on the street anywhere. We didn't have to be in a club.
Right.
And then we would just say, "Hey, if you liked what you're hearing this afternoon, come and hear us tonight. We're playing at so and so."
Yeah. And then I don't know, when you busk, when you play on the street, you never know like how that's going to go or who you're going to interact with. And
Well, you can tell right away if people like it or not, because they
right.
either stop to hear you or they keep walking.
I was gonna ask because like I've done a fair amount of busking. Me and a friend started this thing called Busking for Bread, and we would pick a fundraiser and busk all summer and donate it. Um, but like there's this certain there's like this you like how you just said, you know what catches someone's ear and how they interact with that, and like as you're in that process, you're like, okay, I got to do more like that today because that's working. Did you notice
Right.
that like really affected the songwriting?
I'm not sure it affected the songwriting, but it certainly affected the way we delivered the songs.
Okay.
We began to see, like you said, which songs were going over with people, and then also we developed our shtick of how to interact with the audience, and that was something that was invaluable because
Right.
when you're on the street, you're not just dealing with a rock audience. You're dealing with all different kinds of humanity walking up and down the block.
Yeah.
So we had to figure out, how can we reach this group of people that we're singing to right now? Is it an older group of people? Is it a younger group of people? Is it just women? Is it a combination of men and women, or just men? I mean, we started to take all those things into consideration, and I think that's really what developed us into really, really fine performers, if I do say myself, as far as dealing with an audience that you don't know what to expect from them, and they don't know what to expect from you.
Right. Right. Well, that's so like during the like I mean I know you have a little bit of background in theater, right? Was this
Yeah,
kind of like
quite a big background, as a matter of fact.
but I mean at this time, like when you're starting the Femmes, like
Yeah, I was
okay,
on the
okay.
stage from 9 years old.
Oh yeah? So
Oh yeah, sure.
oh
Oh
so
sure. I did print ads for the paper and for magazines. I did little if someone needed a kid in a play
yeah?
happening in Racine, I would be there. And then in grade school, I started to become more and more interested in theater and in acting and in films. In fact, when I was first getting interested in the arts, music to me represented to me something that was in part of a film or a play. It wasn't that I was into rock bands or really any kind of music at that point in time. I was more interested in becoming an actor. And music was just something that was part and parcel of films or television or theater. So I didn't even really become interested in music until 1968, when my cousin Chris took me in his basement at his parents' house, and he said, "I want to play you this single I just got." And I said, "Really? What is it?" He says, "It's by the Beatles, and it's called Hey Jude." And I heard that, and then I was hooked. I was hooked on popular music, and I was hooked on the Beatles. I mean, I still am. But for the first 4 years after hearing the Beatles, I would listen to nothing but the Beatles. That was it.
Yeah.
So I wasn't involved. I wasn't interested really, except in a passing way, the Stones or Creedence or Deep Purple or what have you. Yeah, I was more interested in the Beatles and jazz because I was studying with that drum teacher I told you about. Yeah, with Joe Police. Yeah, and and I really got into jazz then, and all different aspects of jazz, whether it be Dixieland, big band, small groups, avant-garde, what have you. I just fell in love with it.
Yeah. How how do you introduce avant-garde? Like that's not one that's easy to just be like, yeah, this is cool. Like
Well, because what jazz represented to me from a drumming stance was that you really played the drums in a musical way. It wasn't just a timekeeping aspect.
right.
You could really express yourself through the drums or through the cymbals, which would be accepted more, say, in a traditional jazz format, or certainly more wide open in an avant-garde setting.
It becomes yeah, it does. It becomes way more melodic and sequenced
Yes.
with. But that's like if you're just starting with that, that's such. But you know what? It's interesting. Like with everything that you like to come from like a theater background to be in like this kind of like big picture mentality,
Hmm.
like and to start with like viola and then jump to piano. You started in the middle clef. Now you get both ends, bass and treble.
Right,
You know what I
right,
mean? You got this,
right,
which made reading music probably really easy. but
right.
but you're getting this huge like vast view of music and performance all at the same time, and like
Right.
I feel like with working with a lot of people I work with, or just like how I started, it was very micro, it was very small and focused in a way. Like guitar is what
Mhm.
I started with. So good, I was like, I
Right.
can figure this out, you know. So to have that kind of vast like look on everything, like it
Mm.
makes sense why like the Femmes and like I'm well, what the kind of step before going there. When did you meet Brian? Were you like playing in bands
Well,
before?
one thing I was just going to add to what you were saying was I was interested in show business.
Okay.
So anything that would get me on a stage was okay
Yeah.
by me.
Okay.
If that meant I was reciting a poem, if that meant I was playing a role in a play, if that meant I was playing guitar, or drums or what have you, I was just interested in being on the stage. So I was trying to familiarize myself with all these different kinds of disciplines because I figured the more I knew about all these different things, the better rounded I would be as a performer. So
Yeah.
that's why I wasn't just interested in being a rock musician or being an actor. I wanted to have a taste of all these different things, and also through that kind of a outlook towards my creative career, um, I really came to celebrate the idea of collaborating with different people, and that's something that I don't know when you meet people either in the theater field or in music or what have you, sometimes people just have a singular focus,
Right.
and I didn't want that for myself. I wanted to know as much about as many different things as possible, and not that it's bad to have a singular focus, but it just didn't ring true for me.
Well, not, yeah, it's almost a more mature kind of like bigger discipline to understand all these different facets and be able to like work in any of those. Like it's kind of a the Bruce Lee be like water thing is like you can fit anywhere and really express yourself to the fullest and like that's like the pinnacle of whatever like outlet you want to get into, you know? And like
Sure.
that's that to have that at the beginning is fascinating, you know, not at the beginning, but during this earlier process, like that's so cool. Like, was there like the kind of well, another thing I want to put out there. I talked with Victor Wooten, and we his wife's an actor, and he brought up the importance of acting to the musician, and like how like that and not only with performance, but the whole like Meisner kind of like mentality and the like repeating, hearing, repeating. I don't know if you dove into any of the schools or anything like that.
Oh, sure, sure. Stanford Meisner. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
So
Yeah.
were you diving into that while like learning music at the same time? Like,
Well, when I got into UWM, the college here in Milwaukee, I decided that I was going to be studying music and theater and literature.
mm,
So in my theater studies, I came in contact with, all kinds of different trains of thought as far as theater study. So yeah, I loved it all from the method to Sandy Meisner to I mean, there's all different Stanislavski, Boleslavsky. I mean, all the
right.
Slavskis. But I really fell into it in a great way because it was just so exciting for me that I thought, here's this opportunity. I mean, how many people have this opportunity where you can assume another persona
Right.
and then develop it, research it, and then present it to people, and then have you come off stage and someone say to you, "I didn't even think that was you up there." And that was the biggest compliment when you could really, I guess, pull the wool over someone else's eyes into believing that you were someone else. And I just found that fascinating. And then I think it kind of dripped over into my idea of what a drummer for Violent Femmes would be, because I figured, okay, I've got to have a little bit of humor in what I do. I want to be big on stage, and also I want to just make sure that what I'm doing is exciting for me, and it's not just the manic drummer. It's got to have some kind of a subtext or a story behind it that I could bring on stage every night, so I could try to play differently every night, so I wasn't just locked into one shtick. You know?
Right. Wow. Yeah, no, that totally makes a difference because with the Femmes, everyone was so unique and you guys stuck out in the best way out of a lot of artists coming out at that time. And like
Yeah.
to come up with the idea of filling in this kind of character, not only is like, it sounds like a healthy outlet creatively, but also just
Hmm.
like kind of personally to be like, yeah, to be able to put your space here and step back. Is that
Well, it probably wouldn't work for everybody, but it certainly
right?
worked for me because of my background and what I wanted to bring into it. The other guys, Gordon and Brian, were more or less just musicians looking for a break.
Right.
But I had this whole other aspect to what I wanted to do, and sometime that would get me into trouble with the other two guys because I had a bigger vision of what I wanted to pull off on stage, and they thought it was okay just to play music and stand there.
Hmm.
And I wanted to develop more and have it be more of a theatrical experience rather than just primarily a music experience.
Huh. No, that like when you have a stage, right, and you have people that are coming to you, like that's your chance to make that thing no one's seen before. Because that's kind of what Victor was saying when I was talking. Well, it's weird. I'm talking to both Victors now. With Victor Wooten was saying like when you have people's attention there, that's when you make it worth their time being there. They got a babysitter. They got someone that they called off work, and
Right.
like you put on that show, like which only enhances the music. But it's like
Yeah.
it's hard enough just to get people to be like, I like your song. Let me show up. So I get both ends of that.
Well, when I was in the theater company Theater X, I came into Theater X because my friend Willem Dafoe, who was in the company, decided to move to New York
Yeah.
to find his role there as far as how he fit into the theater world in New York at that time. And when I took over for Willem, my whole idea was I was going to I was coming into a role that he had started, and I was going to take over for him and then move on to newer things. But I had to fulfill this commitment of playing out this play that Willem had started the role for.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting doing that transition where I worked with Willem and learned the part, but then you're left with the part, but you don't just want to mimic what Willem did. You want to make it something that is personal to you. And so that really had an effect on me of not only how do you take over a role that someone else has created, but then how do you make it new for yourself and the audience every
Mm,
night? Even though you perform it night after night, the audience is seeing it maybe just for the first time.
right.
So how do you make it an individual experience for those people and not just repeat yourself all the time just to give a performance? Um, it's a hard thing to do, and I can't say I was always successful doing it, but I certainly tried. I mean that was in my mind.
I can't believe anyone would be successful doing that exactly every night. There's no way. What
Yeah.
did you find like kind of helped you do that? Like kept that role fresh and kept that the ability to express yourself fully, but maybe in someone else's like character or song or like
Right. Well, one of the wonderful things about Violent Femmes, and there were many, was that we could really express ourselves on our instruments. It wasn't as though, hey, Victor, you came up with that part, now just play that part.
right.
I mean, everything was malleable from night to night. So that certainly helped to make it fresh. Also, we were always coming up with new material, and we didn't have a lot of time to rehearse. So a lot of times we would just try out new material in front of the audience,
Mm,
and we wouldn't even know what we were really doing. But we were just chipping away at it like a piece of alabaster, and we're hoping that we're going to get a worthwhile sculpture out of this thing after we're done chiseling it. And and a lot of times that added an excitement just because the audience didn't know and we didn't know either. So we were all kind of standing there in the same position, but wanting to be entertained.
But that keeps that that checks out. Well, that makes sense because like it's all like this could be perfect or not. Like
Yeah,
hope we
yeah,
land it. And like I think
right,
you have to have that level of communication as a group and musician vocabulary to be able to have that type of performance. And like
right.
I guess going back to the idea of busking, that makes that a very comfortable thing to do
Yeah,
because there's no expectation of it has to be like, all right, you're on at 5, you're done at 6. What are you doing?
right.
You know?
Yeah. Well, we encouraged each other to be different. In fact, we always had a saying, let's cultivate our own uniqueness. And that was something that really, it was almost like our mission statement in a way. And it was always funny to be on stage and say it would come a point in a piece like Black Girls, one of the songs that we
Yeah.
played, where everybody's expecting a drum solo. And instead of a drum solo, I would sing a Frank Sinatra song a cappella.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I had that ability because of my two partners where we could go wherever we wanted. And it was always trying to entertain ourselves and the audience. So, so nothing was out of bounds. And I think certainly with my background in theater, I could really bring a lot to that. And
Yeah.
I could really throw a lot of curveballs into the situation.
What was probably one of the most wild to your own expectations curveballs thrown?
Oh boy, there were quite a few of them.
Yeah.
Well, I think just that one I just mentioned, though, maybe during a drum solo singing a song, or instead of starting a song in a way that we had become accustomed to, maybe you would start again in a different way. Or I know from tour to tour, I would always try to change my drum system around. So I would always be introducing new sounds into the group, and that was something that I was really happy that I could do that, because the idea of being just trapped with a snare drum, a floor tom, and a cymbal, or with the transophone, that folk art object that I created, um, it just was good. It was good that we were always challenging ourselves, and that when people saw the Femmes, they didn't know what to expect. We never had a set list. We just called the songs when we were on stage, trying to judge what the audience would want to hear next, or what we would want to hear next in a piggish way. But yeah, I mean, the whole idea of Violent Femmes was freedom. That's really what we were about.
Cultivating your own uniqueness. That's like,
Mhm.
that's such a beautiful, pure thing because there's so much in the music industry or performance industry where it's like kind of like, okay, we're trying to figure out who we are, but figuring out where we fit, and then like,
Yeah,
but to have this kind of sense that you guys can just do you and not
right.
worry about it, but also care that people are there, like really, like those are like that's like a whole nother that's playing a whole nother instrument, playing the audience. And
Yeah,
like
definitely.
not playing them in like, oh, you got played, but playing them into making this the best experience, and that's like that's such a hard thing to do, especially where I only have this many songs. What are we gonna do?
Right, right.
How are we gonna make it work here? Because I don't know. I've played a lot of rooms. I play a lot of nursing homes, and and like it's hard. It's hard to even gauge in certain rooms
Yeah,
how they, and so, like the people won't do anything, and then after they come up to you and you're like, "Oh, that was great," and you're like, "It was,"
yeah,
like,
yeah.
um,
Right. You never know who's in the audience, and you never know how the audience is going to perceive what they're being presented. Um, that's one of the wonderful things about performance, is that you never really know what to expect. Even though you may have something memorized, whether it be a monologue or what have you, and you're presenting it, you still don't know what people are going to think about it, or something that you worked on so hard and you think, oh my God, this is going to just kill. Like people are going to
yeah,
laugh like crazy. And then sometimes it goes over like a lead balloon. It's just, you don't know, but I live for that. I just love not knowing what is going to happen. The great unknown. I mean, it certainly welcomes you freely.
And it's fun. I don't know, because there is no expectation, there is no right or wrong, and like it doesn't work, whatever, do it again.
Right.
Um, did timing from acting kind of affect timing in music for you?
Well, people ask me sometimes about what does one thing have to do with the other? What does music have to do with theater or vice versa? And my standard answer is I don't think they really have that much to do with each other than just in a very perfunctory way. In my way of being an actor or being a musician or combining the two, I find that I'm using different things for each situation I find myself in. It's a whole different set of rules in my mind when I'm an actor on stage than when I'm a musician on stage. Some of the things cross pollinate, but just in my mind, I have to psych myself a different way to perform in each of those different things.
Yeah. Like, what's like for I guess for like a theater role, what do you like mentally kind of do that differs from a music role?
Well, sometimes in a theater situation, unless it's improvisational based, you have to deal with a writer, you
Right.
have to deal with
Okay,
the
in the lines.
director,
Yeah.
you have to deal with lighting people, and you have to deal with the other actors on the stage. Sometimes as a musician, you're dealing with other musicians on the stage, but you're not really getting into the background or the subtext of what's being delivered. Um, and in that way, I think it's very different. Those two different forms of presentation.
I think that's very well said, because like with songs, it's almost better that you don't know exactly what it's about because it
Right.
means more. But then in a role, you got to have that, like you got to know exactly to convey it. That was
Well,
really
you have to have an understanding of what you're trying to present,
right.
and it may be totally wrong, but it also might be totally fascinating. I
Yeah.
mean, I've had the experience sometimes where I presented a scene to a writer, and the writer will say, "Oh my God, I never thought of it that way." And that's the wonderful thing about interpreting music or interpreting text, is that there's no one way to do it.
That's beautiful. I think that's
Yeah.
like what made me think about the idea of timing comparatively is I had a student who just did a musical, or no, sorry, did a play and then did a
Uh huh.
musical, and who's in my class, and I was just like watching like how certain timing things went in each, because I was just cheek to cheek. I was so stoked that he was doing this, and like that's just so cool. And like thinking about the rhythmic aspects we've gone over and seeing how they play out dramatically, or what I mean, like
Sure.
so like especially getting to talk to a drummer of your caliber, like so that I think that was well said. One thing I wanted to kind of bounce to is 1913,
Sure.
your duo group, which is
Yeah.
fantastic,
Oh,
and
thank you. I
like
love 1913.
it's so cool, and like it goes everywhere, and how your cellist builds these loops. Now, like I didn't see any like live performances. I've just been going through the records I can find, or the
Oh, okay.
streaming.
Yeah, there's certainly some live performance stuff, um, that you can find on YouTube. But yeah, I'm glad you appreciate the uniqueness of 1913, because it's something that I've been a part of now for 10 years,
Yeah.
and I love playing with Janet. Um, it's funny because I just saw Janet in a different light yesterday because her father just died a couple
Oh,
days ago, and I just went to the funeral yesterday. And emotions come out in a different way when you're at a funeral and you're
right.
you're dealing with memories. And I was just kind of surprised by some of the things that Janet was telling me. But she's a great musician, good writer, good performer, and also I'm indebted to her because she lets me be what I want to be on stage. And sometimes, as I referred to before, maybe that got me in trouble with the Femmes sometimes. But Janet appreciates what I do and how I present things. So we've had a really good time, not only writing and recording the music, but playing live. And lately too, we've in for some performances, we've expanded the band a little bit, where we have a keyboard player who plays with us, and then also we have a singer that sings with us, and also a saxophonist. So 1913 can perform as a duo, but we can also expand and do larger group presentations as well.
Awesome. Because like I was gonna ask, like with like the kind of expansiveness of like the Femmes and like the looseness, like when you're playing with loops, you can't be as loose. So
No,
like
not at all. Not at
it's
all.
exact opposite.
Yeah, you have to lock into it. The first layer is usually what I'm supporting,
Okay.
and I have to be not only playing clearly and have a very sound rhythmic foundation for Janet, but then also I have to, well, I had to, I should say, develop another sense of playing along to the loop without really hearing it, if that makes any
Oh
sense.
no, it totally does.
Yeah, it's like it becomes second nature to you, and you don't have to concentrate on so much that first layer, because you want to complement what Janet is playing on the last layer,
Right.
which is usually a live cello performance. So it's it was maddening for a while, but now, I mean, after doing it for so many years, I don't even think about it at all. And if Janet has some kind of a little hiccup in that first loop, she hears it too, and then while we're playing, she will correct it. So we have all kinds of checks and balances built into our little duo.
Yeah, well, when you're looping like that, because with I play in a group, and like when one guy can't make it, I got a whole loop thing, and like
Okay.
if the other guy can't make it, so I as long or if no one makes it, I can do this loop thing, and like it's whole
Yeah.
like it's exactly like you're saying. If that first one's messed, it's like we're starting over or we're committing to the end. How are we gonna play
Right.
around
Right.
this hiccup? But that's like a whole new character in a way, like
Yeah.
because of that. Now, branching off, like this kind of like practice and this kind of like attention to this new character that's really focused, but complimenting him like that one. I guess before I finish that question, that's very jazz. Is like
Yeah.
when someone's playing the lead, you build off what they're doing, whatever it is.
Sure.
Um, but did that help with the Night Crickets? Because from what I understand, is you would send just the drum tracks to David J.
Well, what I would do when we started the Night Crickets, I should give you a little background first. When the Femmes played Coachella, the Music and Arts Festival in California in 2013, and backstage I met this guy named Darwin Miners, and it turns out that he was not only a musician, but also he was the manager of David J. And we started talking music, and he wanted to know if I knew anything about David, and I said I don't really. The name isn't familiar to me, and he said, "Well, have you heard of this group Bauhaus?" And I said, "Well, I have heard of the group Bauhaus, but to tell you the honest to God truth, I don't know any of their music at all." So he said, "Oh, okay, well, because I think you would get along great with David if you met him." And I said, "Well, hopefully this will happen someday." So about 2 years later, Darwin invited me out to the West Coast to be a part of a video he was putting together for one of his songs. And David was a part of it as well. So I got to meet David. And I started talking with David. And he said, "Victor, you're not going to believe this, but you would not believe how much Violent Femmes influenced Bauhaus." And I said, "Well, aren't you doing some kind of gothic rock kind of a thing?" I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
that doesn't really sound like the Femmes to me. And he goes, "No, but we love your sense of excitement and the sense of exploration, and just how you took these acoustic instruments and really made rock music with them." And he said influenced rather us in a great way. And I said, "Oh, okay. If putting it that way, I see what you mean, and I see how that could work." So anyway, 2 years ago, around the holiday season, Darwin calls me up and he says, "Hey, Vic, can you create some drum tracks for me that I could write some music to, and I'll pay you for the drum tracks?" And I thought about it, and I went, "Yeah, I could do that. I could create some brand new ones for you. And also, I have kind of a vault here at my studio where every time I had a good drum setup, I would record something just to
Oh,
some
yeah,
kind of
yeah, yeah.
just to a time reference, just because I love the sound of what I had going at that particular point. So I said, "Would you mind if I sent you some of these things?" And he goes, "No, whatever you want to send me is fine." So I got I think like a handful of different um, drum tracks together. Some were just drum set, some were drums set with percussion, and I would send those to him, and then he would start writing stuff. And he had also said, um, "This is really great. I think I can make something of this." And I said, "Well, what if I throw another wrench into the works here? And why don't you see if David wants to maybe be part of this? Maybe he can play some bass on some of this, or any other instrument he wants to play." So I would send stuff to them. They would send it back to me, and then I would maybe add a bass part or more percussion, or I would play guitar or keyboard or what have you. I would add other things and then send it back. And we kept going back and forth until we came to the conclusion, oh, this piece is done. And so before we knew it, we had 6 finished pieces. And it was really exciting because
Yeah.
I never knew what I was going to get in the email the next day. And it was the same for them. It was almost like a kid Christmas morning, wanting to open up the packages. So I came to really appreciate what was happening, and the other guys realized too that this was really something special, that was a matter of kismet. We didn't plan for this to happen. It wasn't, hey, let's have a group, let's get this group together. It was just a matter of playing music back and forth, but in a very alien fashion, because we couldn't be in the same room together. So we came to really appreciate what was happening and went into it full force. And eventually I talked to a friend of mine at Omnivore Recordings, um, and I talked to her, and I said, and this is Cheryl Pawlowski is her name. She's
Okay.
actually, it's her label, and she's from Milwaukee, and we had never met before. And I called her out of the blue, and I said, "Hey, listen, we haven't met, but I'd like to talk to you about this group that I got started. I don't know how it's happened, but we've got 6 songs finished, and we'd like to know if you maybe want to do something with us." So I sent these songs to Cheryl on a Monday. She called me back on the following Wednesday and said, "Let's make a deal." so so I said, "Wow, this is the fastest record deal I've ever had in my life. This sounds fantastic." And then what happened was we were going to have a 6-song EP, but the 3 of us kept writing and recording. So eventually we had 13 songs. So I went back to Cheryl and I said, "Cheryl, I'm sorry, but we've given birth to a few more babies here. And would you mind if we put this out as a full record?" And she goes, "Well, send us the other stuff and I'll play it for the staff and we'll see what's happening." And everybody loved it. So then we just decided, all right, let's work on a full length record, and let's take our time and gather the artwork and get the tracks mastered and figure out how we're going to introduce this to the world. And we're very happy to find out that people are really receptive to what we're doing. And to tell you the truth, we're already working on a brand new album.
Nice.
So it's like it's almost like we've got this crazy addiction between the 3 of us. And I'll tell you this: the next stuff that we're working on is
Yeah.
absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it is pretty heavy, politically speaking, and there's a fair amount of pathos on the record. So I'm happy to keep working on this stuff, and I can't wait until it's finished. In fact, I think we're having a Zoom meeting coming up in a few days, and we're just going to talk about what we're going to do with the next tracks that we have been compiling. But it's nice in that we have 3 lead singers in the group,
Yeah.
and also we have 3 writers. So I'm not just the drummer, he's not just the bass player, he's not just the guitarist. It's like we intersect in all these different ways. And I don't know very many other bands that would allow you to do that.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
it's like an amalgamation of all
Yeah.
those characters put together. And like it's interesting. I talked to David J a few days ago,
Oh,
and
great. I'm glad you talked to
oh,
him.
it
Good.
was it was amazing. This record I've been blasting it nonstop. It's such a
Oh,
good record.
good.
Free Society's like at one politically it has to get more expansive from a free society. Like conceptually,
Yeah.
that totally makes sense. But
Right.
it was interesting. He like had this whole like kind of full like headspace he liked to be in, like, or at least he described he liked to be more of like this kind of supporting character, and kind of, it was very interesting hearing your approach with the Femmes because it was very like similar, and it makes so much sense why you guys get along so well and why this record keeps feeding itself and how you guys keep coming up with more, because it seems like
Right.
that's the ethos that like you both thrive in. And like to have that creative headspace takes a lot of due diligence and practice to get to, but the
Right.
rewards are this, or the reap of the rehearsal is this, and like it's such an amazing record. Just putting it out there again, like what when to like send one thing out, like when you're sending these tracks, and like I would, on the side note, when you get the room to sound right, drumming wise,
Right.
when you get that,
Right.
that's a golden nugget no matter what you play. But
Uh-huh.
when you're sending these things out, like, do you remember any of the headspace you were in making them, or was it just like I tracked that and I can't believe what I'm getting back?
Well, I was always surprised. And also, I was always looking for consultation with my other two band members. So there wasn't how can I put it? There wasn't kind of a piggish possessiveness about something that I would present.
Right,
I was all for the idea of, hey, here's this. Let's develop it into something else. And that's because of my theater mindset. I love to
right,
collaborate. And case in point, say the song Amanda's Mantra, right?
right,
Okay, so David said, I want to write something about Amanda Gorman, who's this incredible young poet. And I said, yeah, I know her work. I would love to do something along those lines too. But I had been thinking about writing something for a dear friend of mine, this old girlfriend from high school that had just recently died. And I said I wanted to maybe write a lyric that would be a homage to her. And he said, well, is there any way you could kind of allude to that, but also write something about poetry or Amanda in specifics or something of that ilk? So I went back to the drawing board and thought about how could I imply something that would really satisfy all these things that we're talking about. And I figured, okay, well, first of all, maybe I will write just a little 4-line poem, and that's where James Dean and Marilyn Monroe come in.
I love that line.
Right. And
Yeah,
and then and then I figured I would get more specific and talk about Amanda and how what she's writing is a beacon of light in a very sorrowful world. And I thought, well, maybe I could put these two ideas together. And the music that came back really threw me for a loop because that strange electronic keyboard, the
right,
bubbling sound, and all this, and I went, oh my god, how is this going to work now with these words I've come up with? But I worked with it for a while, and I figured out, at least in my mind, how I could make it happen. And then I sent it to the other guys, and thankfully they really loved what I presented back to them. But that was another sense of, and even at the end, I was just going to call it Amanda,
right.
and David said, why don't we call it Amanda's Mantra?
Yeah,
And I went, oh
yeah,
my God, that's perfect. So I mean, some other person might have said, well, I wrote it and I really like this, and I want to stay with this. But
yeah.
we're not that way. We've all been completely malleable in each other's hands, which is really refreshing, I tell you. Especially, how things can be in a band context
Right.
sometimes.
That's amazing. Like like that. That's because I going through this. I'm like, I'm trying to figure out who Amanda was. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
like in the song's context, I'm like, I don't. Even today, driving to get ready to talk with you, I was like, I don't get where this one's like. I really like the lines, and I was following the narrative of this person, but I didn't know who it was. So that's
yeah.
cool that it's a shout out to the poet and to this
The idea of
friend of
poetry,
yours. Yeah,
and then also having in mind that idea because my friend didn't. My friend was very beautiful. She didn't exactly look like Marilyn Monroe, but she was blonde and had beautiful blue eyes, and
yeah,
that's how I made the connection there. And just the idea of uh, Marilyn Monroe kissing James Dean.
yeah.
I just
That's
had like it was like high powered romance for me.
yeah, but that's such a good line. Like
I know.
that's I think that's the first song I heard when Ray sent me everything. I was like, whoa.
Oh,
This record because like I got them all jumbled or whatever, and like
right,
but
right.
I'd rather hear everything before reading about it, and
Yeah,
like it was one song I would love to hear your perspective on is Black
sure.
Leather on the Inside. So
Oh,
when that
yeah.
one came together, David was telling me it was from this loop from Peter Lofner from this vinyl,
Right,
which is a Cleveland-based singer-songwriter, and
right.
um, and I've talked to a bunch of people about Peter Lofner. So did he bring that up when he sent you this loop, or was this just a loop?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, he did. Yeah, he did. He told me the impetus for that, and I had sent for that particular piece. I had sent that drum track that was. I think I have to think back on it now. It was a series of percussion, and I believe it was two drum sets, maybe not two complete drum sets, but there's a drum set on the left and a drum set on the right. And I just presented that. And I didn't know what else was going to come back from that. But then I eventually heard the impetus for the story. David told me about that. And then David, I think, had improvised the bass line along to those drum tracks that I sent. And he had told me a lot of the way he worked on this music for this album was he didn't even want to hear it until he was in the studio
Yeah.
and he had a bass on.
Yeah.
And then he would just say, roll the track, and he would just improvise. And a lot of what you're hearing is just his first impressions.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes the album it's so full of life and musicality in that we didn't have a lot of time to study
Mm.
what was happening. It was almost like, let's kind of get these first ideas down and let's really hold them in high esteem. Let's always try to work with the first idea.
Mm. It's like the practice of creativity was this record. Like you know what I mean, like especially how David's process is. He's just going in and practicing coming up with
Mm-hmm.
something, which is interesting because musicians don't practice creativity in the same way as like technique or like how to read right or you know what I mean, like so like
Yeah.
I think that's part of why the process for you guys and like listening is so pure and like engaging.
Mm-hmm. I think it could be, yes.
That's so cool.
Yeah,
um
it was I can't tell you how much fun it was to put that record together and how proud the three of us are of that record and we're just so jazzed that we're going forward now and we're already almost completed another EP or a full length album. I'm not sure what it's going to turn out to be, but yeah, I just thank God that during the plague I just
yeah.
had some other people to play with. It was just really a godsend.
Um, so like during that time, what did like aside from this, like I found myself having to get very structured in like, okay,
Hmm.
I'm going to spend an hour writing. I'm going to spend an hour doing this, an hour learning this, and like that's the only I had to structure my like days to get through that nonsense.
Yeah, yeah.
Like just I don't. Did you? What was your process like that, or is it just really honing in on this? Because I know you have your own studio, and
Well,
like
I'm kind of embarrassed to say that
yeah.
my life didn't really change. I was still, just me and my wife, and the way things are set up here, I have a compound where we have a duplex that we live in, and then behind the duplex is a cottage, and this cottage is my recording studio and my office. So I spend so much of my day here every day, and I'm not really around a lot of people. So my life didn't really change that much, other than now I couldn't if I wanted to go out and be around people, I couldn't really do that unless, of course, you're wearing a mask,
Yeah.
or you're going to see some people that have been fully vaxxed and boosted.
Right.
So that presented a little drama of itself, but I really didn't feel like, oh my God, I'm missing out on the world now or anything like that, because I would still be here reading or writing music or recording or watching films, or and this is another incredible thing that we had available to us during this time, and that is YouTube,
Right.
where you could go and find these performances from these musicians or actors or writers that you never even knew existed.
Right.
And
Right.
and I found it such an educational tool that I never felt alone, or that I was really hungering for other human contact, because I had my wife, I had my kids I could talk to on the phone, I had grandkids here, and then also I had Janet. Janet and I maintained a relationship through it all. So yeah, I just felt like, in a way, welcome to my world.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Like it was interesting. I work at a nonprofit art gallery called Negative Space in Cleveland as well,
Okay.
and
So are you going to bring 1913 there to play?
if you guys want to,
Sure, we'd love to.
Okay, I'll text you my email address and like we'll
Cool.
figure it out. That would be amazing. But
No, that would be fun.
that you would love it. Just like describing how the excitement of like new performances. Like this is one of the coolest spots in Cleveland. But Gotti, the
Great.
guy who runs it and like has the like the main kind of gallery room, he was like, like this is every day. Every day is like, I don't know if we're gonna have enough money to get through next month. And just going in and creative and living in that kind of like anxiety that was new for so many people. So they hear that from you, like, oh, that was just kind of like more time to study, or I think that makes sense. Like,
Well, it's either that or just turn into a drug addict or an
right,
alcoholic.
panic,
I mean,
not productive.
No, and I tell you, for the most part, I had a pretty healthy attitude towards the pandemic. I mean, there was maybe 1 month where it got a little hairy. I was drinking a little bit too much and smoking too much pot, and it just got to the point where, all right, okay, I'm done with this now. But it was almost like I had to get that out of my system, and I was feeling bad because some of my other friends were really losing themselves in drink or drugs, and I knew I wasn't going to be that. But at one point in time, I went, holy shit, I just got to have a break from my mind for a while.
Right.
And that's kind of the way I handled it.
Well, and it's, I know with like as much of like self-practice as any creative endeavor has, like there is that kind of time to let go and kind of like, kind of delude yourself and then bounce back. So,
well,
like,
sometimes I don't know how you are, but sometimes I'll go for periods of time where I don't want to hear music. I hate music. I don't want to have anything to do with it for maybe a couple weeks,
totally.
and then I'll start listening to records every day again, or playing the drums again, or guitar, or whatever it is. But I think that's healthy sometimes, just to reject everything, and then it gives you a freedom to maybe come back to things in a fresh way.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that, because it's exciting again. It's putting that new spin, just like not doing the same show, but like that's a hard balance. A lot of people, I think, are one extreme or the other, to come back to it and find new ways to look at the cup of music. Oh, I'm going to look at it from the bottom today. Oh, that's a different thing,
Right. Well, one thing that I'm excited about too, I know you mentioned before that you're a teacher.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I was talking to my daughter yesterday, and my grandson Milo, who's 5 years old,
Yeah.
he's coming over next Thursday for his first drum lesson.
No way. That's so exciting.
I
Oh, I'm
know.
so
I'm
happy
excited
for
about
you.
it. I'm excited about it, and he's crazy about it
Yeah.
because I bought him a little drum set when he was 2 years old, and he's had this little toy drum set to deal with, but now he's going to get to come and play on the real drums, and I'm going to start teaching him rhythmic notation and everything, and I'm excited because I used to teach a long time ago, but I
Yeah.
haven't taught in decades. No.
Well, it can be taxing because you really start to care and you really want
Yeah.
people to grow and like, but when it's grandson, like, oh, I'm so excited for you. That's gonna be so awesome
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
because your son plays too, right? And
Oh, my son is a
he's on the
great
record,
drummer.
right?
Well, I mean, he's one of these people that makes you sick because you can give him any instrument and he'll figure out how to play something
Yeah.
on it. But his drumming is incredible, and he's a great producer and engineer, and he's living out in Los Angeles right now, and he's member of Langhorne Slim's band,
Mm,
and they're out on tour right now, as a matter of fact. But yeah, Mal he's a great musician. In fact, he's going to be coming back here in December and for the holidays, and then we always manage to turn on the studio and
nice.
record something. So that'll be fun. But
Do you think like being a drummer kind of lends to like studio like thought because you're behind a band, you're kind of guiding a group and almost live producing in a way. Do you think that kind of like makes the idea of recording and engineering and producing more clear?
well, let's see. That might take a while for me to answer because no, because I think it's a very good question in that when I started to get in, like I told you before, music to me was just something that was in a film or television. And
Right.
then when I started to become a musician, I became more musically minded. And I find that as a producer or as an engineer or as a drummer working in a recording context, it really helps to have not only a good understanding of time and how time is applied, and you can play behind the beat, in the middle of the beat, or in front of the beat, and that's very
Right.
important how you influence the feel of the music. And when you're an engineer, you're trying to capture what is being given to you by, let's say, in this sense, a drummer. Okay, what are this drummer's strengths? How does he come across in a recorded way? Has he or she ever been recorded properly? Um, what can you suggest to the drummer, being a fellow drummer, that will help them accomplish what they're trying to do? So I think it all comes into play in the world of music and the world of expression. Um, and I would think that having an understanding for me as an engineer and as a producer, I mean, I got my first tape recorder when I was 9 years old. So my father, who was a barber, I had a friend who was like one of these guys that, hey Vic, I got this new toy. I got to show you this thing I got. Whether it would be a car or
Yeah.
a new set of hair clippers, or in this case, he had this little reel-to-reel tape recorder, which I still have here. I'm looking at it right now. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got it when I was 9 years old, and it's got it's a reel to reel. It's only 3-inch reels, and it's made by Iowa. But that started me on my journey, and then I mean, I still have all my different tape recorders except for when I had my pro studio upstairs here. I had a hybrid Sony MCI 24 track, a 2-inch machine, and I sold that when I sold all my pro gear, and that was about maybe 10 years ago when I sold everything, and now I just work on a digital workstation. But Yeah, all that stuff applies. I think the more knowledge you have in all those different worlds, you can bring it to bear and not only help yourself but help other people.
I think that's well said and very insightful. Because, like, I don't know, I've noticed a lot of my drumming friends also are interested in recording and producing.
Right, a lot of
Um,
drummers are. That's true.
but Victor, thank you so much for your time. This has been a very engaged and enlightful conversation for myself, and I really appreciate your time.
Well, fabulous. And is this towards something you're writing, or what is it for?
Podcast.
Oh, it's a podcast. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Um,
I wasn't sure. Okay.
no, perfect. It's perfect. But yeah. So what? Because I was working with Ray in like, I'm gonna talk to Darwin in a couple days too.
Okay.
So this has been a really cool process to see like every angle of this record, and it's been one I'm such a fan of.
Oh, great.
And I'm super excited to get the chat with you. And I've been a fan of the Femmes for a while, or for ever since I started trying to figure out guitar.
Okay.
So not a while, a pretty long time.
Yeah.
So this is
Well,
very exciting.
at least as far as Gordon's concerned, you don't have to really get into too many chords.
Right. I'm not worried about the Coltrane changes. I'm just
That's right. Hey, but
But,
listen, make sure you send me your email stuff about
yes.
probably